Isaac Clarke had survived the impossible before. He had walked through corridors where the dead refused to stay dead. He had watched friends twist into nightmares. He had stood before alien artifacts that whispered promises of salvation while orchestrating extinction. The markers had haunted him across star systems, through dimensions of madness, through the fractured landscapes of his own mind. And still, he had walked out alive. But survival is not the same as victory. Every breath he took was borrowed. Every moment of silence carried the weight of screams he could no longer unhear. The evacuation vessel Shimura's Echo a cruel name, he thought was supposed to be his final escape. A deep space medical frigate carrying the last survivors of the marker incident on Titan Station.
Quarantine protocols. Psychological evaluations.
A long journey towards something resembling peace.
Isaac didn't believe in peace anymore, but he believed in distance.
He sat alone in the observation deck, staring into the void.
Space had once been beautiful to him. Now it was simply empty.
The stars didn't comfort. They reminded him how far madness could reach.
How far it had already reached.
"Clarke, you should eat something." The voice belonged to Dr. Kira Vanson, one of the few medical officers who didn't treat him like a weapon or a broken thing.
Just a man. Tired. Haunted. Human.
"I'm fine," Isaac said, though they both knew it was a lie.
She didn't press.
That was the thing about survivors, they recognized each other's boundaries. The distances they needed to keep from themselves. The ship hummed around them, engines folding space in ways Isaac's engineer mind understood mathematically, but could never quite accept emotionally.
Faster than light travel always felt like falling.
Like being pulled through a tunnel that shouldn't exist. And then, without warning, the tunnel changed . The lights flickered. Not the usual power fluctuation.
Something else.
The hum deepened into a groan, as if the ship itself had become aware of something terrible approaching. Isaac's instincts, honed through years of surviving the unsurvivable, screamed at him to move. He was on his feet before the alarms even sounded. The observation window erupted with color. Not the clean distortion of FTL transit. Not the geometric predictability of a jump corridor.
This was wrong.
Crimson and violet bled into reality like a wound opening in space itself. Shapes moved within the distortion, impossible geometries that hurt to perceive.
Eyes that weren't eyes. Screams that had
Isaac knew madness when he saw it. He had been its prisoner for years. But this was different. This wasn't the cold, calculated horror of the markers. This was alive.
Hungry.
Chaotic in a way that felt less like intelligence and more like the absence of natural law. The ship shuddered. Metal groaned. Crew members scrambled through corridors, voices rising in panic. Isaac ran toward the bridge, muscle memory overriding fear. In crisis, engineers didn't freeze. They moved. They solved. They survived. He never made it. The anomaly erupted, a tidal wave of unreality crashing through the ship's hull without breaking it. The walls remained intact, but space itself folded. Isaac felt his body pulled in directions that didn't exist. Up became sideways.
Forward became through .
His stomach lurched as gravity lost meaning.
And then he heard them. Voices. Not hallucinations. Not marker construct.
These were different.
Older.
They sang in frequencies that bypassed his ears and stabbed directly into his brain.
They promised knowledge. Power. Freedom from suffering.
Isaac had heard it all before. "No," he whispered, then shouted it.
No.
He had learned, through agony and repetition, that the only way to survive madness was to refuse it. Not with hope. Not with faith. With sheer, stubborn denial. The voices shrieked in frustration. The ship disintegrated around him, not destroyed, but unmade . Atoms scattered across dimensions that had no name. Isaac felt himself torn from reality, pulled into a space between spaces where physics was a suggestion and sanity was a liability. He tumbled through impossible color. through cold that burned, through silence that screamed. And then, for just a moment, he saw them, shapes made of spite and hunger. Entities that existed because the universe had cracks, and nightmares needed somewhere to live. They circled him like sharks, tasting his mind, searching for the fault lines where terror could wedge itself in. But Isaac Clarke's mind was already broken. The markers had shattered him years ago. The pieces had been glued back together with trauma and exhaustion and spite. There were no clean edges left to exploit.
No intact illusions to corrupt.
The entity's hesitated.
In that hesitation, Isaac fell
Through the screaming void. Through layers of reality collapsing and reforming. Through colors that didn't have names and sounds that existed only as pain. He fell until falling lost meaning. And then, finally, he stopped. Isaac drifted. There was no ship.
No floor. No up or down.
Just endless twilight, the color of old bruises, thick with whispers and the distant sensation of being watched by things that had never been alive.
He should have been dead. Should have been insane.
Should have dissolved the moment his body touched this place where matter was negotiable and thought had weight. But Isaac Clarke had already walked through his own personal hell. And hell, it turned out, was portable. The whispers came first.
Soft, almost gentle.
Isaac. He recognized the voice immediately.
Nicole.
His Nicole. Dead for years, but never really gone. The marker had used her image to torment him. To guide him. To break him down until he couldn't tell memory from hallucination. He closed his eyes.
Open them.
She was still there, drifting in the void before him. Beautiful and terrible and not real. You're not her, Isaac said quietly. The figure smiled. Does it matter? I know what you want, what you need. Peace, Isaac. Rest. Doesn't that sound ? You're not her, Isaac repeated, louder this time.
And I'm not falling for this again.
The smile faltered. The figure flickered, its edges bleeding into the surrounding void. Other shapes emerged from the darkness, crew members he'd failed to save. Friends who'd died screaming, versions of himself twisted into monuments of self-loathing. They circled him, voices overlapping. You couldn't save us. You're a coward. You should have died with us. You should have died with us. Isaac had heard these accusations 1,000 times. In his nightmares. In his waking hours. In the silent moments when exhaustion lowered his defenses.
I know, he said simply.
The entities paused. Confusion rippled through them like wind through smoke. I know I couldn't save you, Isaac continued, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. I know people died because I wasn't fast enough, smart enough, strong enough. I know I'm a coward who survived when better people didn't. The shapes pressed closer, hungry for the despair they sensed beneath his words. But I also know you're not real. You're just another trick, another lie. And I've been lied to by experts. The void screamed. The false Nicole lunged at him, her face tearing open to reveal something with too many teeth and eyes that wept fire. The other phantoms followed, abandoning pretense, revealing themselves as writhing masses of malice and appetite. Isaac didn't run. He had nowhere to run to. Instead, he did what he'd always done when the universe tried to kill him. He endured. The entities tore at his mind, searching for cracks. For trauma they could exploit. For fear they could feed on. They found plenty years of accumulated horror, guilt that had calcified into bone-deep exhaustion. The kind of existential despair that came from understanding how small and meaningless one man was against cosmic indifference. But they also found something unexpected.
Resistance.
Not the bright, defiant resistance of a hero who believed he could win. Not the zealous resistance of faith convinced of ultimate victory. Just the quiet, stubborn resistance of a man who had been broken before and learned that broken things could still function. That survival didn't require hope. Only persistence. The entities recoiled. They were accustomed to minds that shattered cleanly, to souls that could be reshaped, to prey that eventually gave an asterisk. Isaac Clarke had given in years ago,
and then kept walking anyway.
The void began to change around him. The whispers grew frustrated, then confused, then almost uncertain. For things born from pure malevolence, uncertainty was poison.
Isaac felt something shift.
A current in the unreality. A direction in the directionlessness. He was being pushed.
Not pulled. Not claimed. Rejected.
The entities couldn't break him, and what couldn't be broken couldn't be used.
He was useless to them.
Worse than useless, he was resistant. A foreign antibody in the bloodstream of madness itself. The void spat him out. Isaac fell again, but this time there was destination in the falling.
Weight returned.
Direction reasserted itself. The twilight thinned, replaced by something almost resembling normal space.
Almost.
He caught glimpses as he plummeted, vast shapes moving through impossible architecture. Cities built from screaming faces, oceans of blood beneath skies made of eyes. A dimension where thought and matter blurred together, where nightmares could walk and sanity was the real delusion.
And then, mercifully, he broke through.
Reality solid, physical, real slammed into him like a hammer. Isaac Clarke crashed into hell for the second time in his life.
This one just happened to be called the Imperium of man.
Isaac woke to the smell of burning promethium and the sound of distant gunfire. His body was a catalog of pain, ribs cracked, shoulder dislocated, blood crusted across a dozen lacerations he didn't remember receiving.
The crash had nearly killed him. Nearly.
He was discovering that nearly was the closest he ever got to peace. He forced himself to sit up, biting back a groan. The world swam, then focused. He was in a crater. Scorched earth surrounded him, still smoking from whatever atmospheric entry his body had survived. Above, the sky was the color of infection-sickly yellow-green, choked with industrial smog and something else.
Something that moved wrong in his peripheral vision. Isaac had learned to trust his peripheral.
They usually spotted the monsters before his conscious mind caught up. He climbed to his feet, every muscle screaming protest. His engineer's suit, the RIG that had kept him alive through countless horrors, was cracked and flickering. The holographic health display sputtered between yellow and red.
Critical condition. He knew the feeling.
The landscape was industrial. Massive refineries stretched toward the toxic sky, their skeletal frameworks half collapsed. Mining equipment lay abandoned, rusted and broken.
This had been a working site once. Now it was a graveyard.
And graveyards, Isaac knew, were never truly empty.
Movement.
To his left.
Shambling figures emerging from the ruins.
Isaac's hand went instinctively to his hip, reaching for a plasma cutter that wasn't there.
He'd lost everything in the transition. No weapon. No tools.
Just his broken body and his even more broken mind.
The figures drew closer. Human-shaped, but wrong.
Twisted. Their bodies bore mutations that seemed both organic and impossible, extra limbs sprouting from wrong angles, flesh that rippled with mouths, eyes that wept luminescent fluid.
Not necromorph, but close enough. They saw him,
turned toward him with jerky, uncoordinated movements. Voices bubbled from ruined throats, chanting words in a language that hurt to hear.
Isaac ran, not from coward, from tactics. You didn't fight without weapons.
You didn't engage without understanding the enemy.
You survived first, fought second.
He sprinted through the ruins, damaged ribs stabbing with every breath. The mutants followed, faster than they looked. Their chanting grew louder, more excited.
They had found prey.
Isaac's mind worked even as his body failed.
Engineer's instinct.
Every environment was a toolbox if you knew how to look. The refinery ahead collapsed, but not completely destroyed. Support struts still intact. Fuel lines still pressurized if the gauges weren't lying. He vaulted over debris, slid under a half-fallen gantry, and found what he needed. An industrial plasma torch. Disconnected, probably abandoned when the workers fled whatever hell had claimed this place. Isaac grabbed it, checked the fuel cell half full, enough and spun to face his pursuers. The mutants poured through the gap after him, shrieking their diseased hymns. Isaac triggered the torch. Blue-white flame roared to life. He swung it in a wide arc, and the lead mutant walked directly into the superheated stream. It ignited like kindling, its corrupted flesh burning with unnatural colors, purple and green flames that screamed as they consumed. The others hesitated, just for a moment. Isaac used that moment. He moved deeper into the refinery, leading them into the maze of machinery he was already mapping in his head.
Engineers understood system. Flows, pressure points.
He turned a corner, kicked open a control panel, and yanked 3 specific levers. The pressurized fuel lines, dormant for who knew how long, roared back to life. Isaac dove behind a support column. The mutants followed him around the corner and walked directly into the stream of volatile chemicals. Isaac threw the plasma torch. The explosion was beautiful in its efficiency. The refinery section became an inferno, the mutants reduced to burning ash before they could even scream. The shock wave knocked Isaac flat, but he was already behind cover, already moving as soon as the flames settled.
Survive. Adapt. Continue.
It was all he knew how to do. When the smoke cleared, Isaac stood alone among the wreckage, breathing hard, bleeding from a dozen places, but alive. And he wasn't alone for long. The gunfire he'd heard earlier grew louder. Voices, human voices, shouting orders in a language he didn't recognize but whose meaning was universal.
Military commands. Organized resistance. Soldiers emerged from the ruin.
Not like any soldiers Isaac had ever seen. They wore thick flak armor, carried weapons that looked like oversized rifles built for stopping power over accuracy. Their faces were hard, scarred, eyes that had seen too much and expected to see worse. They raised their weapons when they saw him.
Isaac raised his hands. Universal gesture. Non-hostile.
One of the soldier SAN officer, judging by the more elaborate armor, approached cautiously. He barked something in that harsh, unfamiliar language.
Isaac shook his head. I don't understand.
The officer's eyes narrowed. He gestured to the burning wreckage behind Isaac, then to Isaac himself, then back to the wreckage.
A question.
Isaac understood. Asterisk, did you do this?
Asterisk, he nodded.
The soldiers exchanged glances. One of them said something that sounded almost like respect. The officer lowered his weapon slightly, though his guard never dropped completely. He pointed at Isaac, then at himself, then gestured toward the direction they'd come from. Another universal message. Asterisk, come with us.
Asterisk, Isaac hesitated.
Every instinct screamed at him not to trust. Authorities, military, governments, they had all betrayed him before.
Used him. Tried to weaponize the very horrors he'd fought to destroy.
But alone, in this alien hell, with nothing but a broken RIG and a body held together by spite.
He didn't have many choices.
Isaac nodded. The soldiers surrounded him, not threatening, but not trusting either. They moved as a unit through the ruins, weapons trained outward, watching for threats. Isaac walked with them, a prisoner or a refugee or something in between. Behind them, the burning refinery collapsed into ash. Ahead, somewhere in the poisoned distance, an entire world waited. A world that knew only war.
A world that had perfected fear.
And Isaac Clarke, the man who had survived cosmic horror once before, had just arrived in a universe that had industrialized it. The soldiers brought him to a forward operating base buried in the ruins of what had once been a hab block. Sandbags and razor wire formed hasty fortifications. Heavy weapons pointed outward at a world that wanted everyone inside dead. Isaac was stripped of his damaged RIG, searched thoroughly, and thrown into a detention cell that was really just a reinforced supply room. He didn't resist. Cooperation kept you alive longer than defiance when you didn't understand the rules yet.
He waited. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. Time felt negotiable after falling through the warp.
When they came for him, it wasn't soldiers.
3 figures entered the cell.
The first wore robes of deep crimson trimmed with gold, parchment scrolls hanging from his belt, his face hidden behind a mirrored mask. The second was hunched and ancient, wired with crude cybernetics that clicked and whirred with each labored breath.
The third made Isaac's skin crawl.
She was young, perhaps 20, but her eyes were centuries old. She wore restraint psychic dampeners, he would learn later, and when she looked at him, Isaac felt her gaze press against the inside of his skull.
A psyker. A telepath.
Isaac had dealt with the marker's mental intrusions before. This felt disturbingly similar. The robed figure spoke first, his voice amplified by vox grills built into his mask. The language was still incomprehensible, but a servitor lobotomized human fused with translation machinery stuttered forward and began interpreting.
You are, stranger, not of Imperium, ship records, no match, genetic, aberrant, origin, unknown.
Isaac kept his face neutral.
Where am I?
The servitor relayed his words. The robed figure tilted his head. Mining world. Designation Carval. Quarantine zone. Chaos. Corruption. Active. You will explain survival. Chaos. The word meant nothing to Isaac, but the way everyone in the room tensed when it was spoken told him everything he needed to know. It was their word for the nightmare he'd fallen through.
I crashed here, Isaac said simply. I'm an engineer. I survived by improvising. That's what I do.
The psyker stepped forward. Her voice was soft, but it bypassed his ears entirely, speaking directly into his mind. Asterisk, let me see your truth. Asterisk, her consciousnness pressed against his, not violently, but thoroughly. Isaac felt her rifling through his memories like files in a database.
She saw Aegis the Seventh.
The sprawl.
The markers. Nicole's death.
The endless cycle of horror and survival.
She saw his breaking.
His reassembly. The scar tissue where his sanity had been.
And then she recoiled.
The psyker stumbled backward, gasping. The robed figure caught her, barking orders. The cyborg clicked forward, scanning Isaac with a device that hummed and beeped disapprovingly. Impossible, the servitor translated, though the word came from the cyborg's clicking speech. Warp, exposure, extreme, corruption, probability 97%, current, corruption, 0. The robed figure stared at Isaac. Even behind the mask, suspicion radiated from him. You fell through warp, exposed to entities, survived, uncorrupted. Explain.
Isaac almost laughed. It was either that or scream.
I've been possessed before, he said quietly. By something that called itself a path to salvation. It showed me things, promised me things, used people I loved as weapons against me. He met the psyker's eyes directly. She flinched but held his gaze. I learned that the only way to survive that kind of invasion is to recognize it, to know it's a lie, not because you have faith in something better, but because you've seen the lie before. The psyker spoke without the servitor's help this time, her voice trembling. His mind is fractured, but the fractures are old already healed wrong. The warp cannot. It searches for cracks, but his cracks are already full of scar tissue. The cyborg clicked rapidly.
The servitor translated.
Hypothesis, previous psychic trauma, creates immunity. Precedent, unknown. Recommend, study, possible, application. The robed figure was silent for a long moment. When he spoke again, his tone had shifted.
Still suspicious, but now tinged with something else. Interest.
You will remain. Inquisition, authority. You will be observed, tested. Should you survive, service may be required. It wasn't a question.
Isaac knew that tone.
The authority that didn't need to threaten because it had already won.
And if I refuse?
The robed figure gestured to the window. Beyond the reinforced glass, the toxic sky churned. In the distance, shapes moved, massive, impossible things that hurt to perceive. Then you die here with everyone else. Isaac looked at the world outside.
At the soldiers fighting a war they couldn't win.
At the civilians he'd seen them on the way in, huddled in makeshift shelters. praying to a god he didn't know for salvation that probably wouldn't come. He'd seen this before. The desperation, the inevitability. But he'd also learned something the markers never understood. Inevitability could be delayed. Long enough for a few more people to escape. To survive. To matter.
"What do you need me to do?" Isaac asked.
The robed figure's mask betrayed no emotion, but Isaac sensed satisfaction behind it. "Fight, survive, endure. You are anomaly. Chaos hunts anomalies. We will observe what happens when hunter becomes hunted."
Isaac was dismayed.
Soldiers escorted him to another cell slightly less hostile this time. They brought him food, dense, tasteless rations that were still better than starvation. Medical servitors tended his wounds with mechanical efficiency. And through it all, Isaac felt eyes on him. The Inquisition was watching.
Chaos, somewhere in the screaming distance, was watching.
And Isaac Clarke, the man who'd survived hell once before, realized with grim certainty that he'd just volunteered for it again. But this time, hell was infinite, and it had been waiting for someone like him. The attacks began 3 days after his interrogation.
Subtle at first.
Whispers in empty corridors.
Shadows that moved against the light.
Small things easily dismissed as trauma or exhaustion.
Isaac dismissed nothing.
He'd learned that lesson years ago aboard the USG Ishimura. The moment you started rationalizing the impossible was the moment it killed you. The Inquisition had given him limited freedom within the base. They wanted to observe him in action, he suspected.
To see how he functioned under pressure.
He didn't disappoint. The engineering sections were a disaster, ancient machinery held together with prayers and wire, systems operating decades past their designed lifespan. The Imperium's relationship with technology was religious rather than practical, which offended every fiber of Isaac's engineer's soul. But broken things were his specialty. He worked, repaired, improved. The base's tech priests, the cybernetic priests who maintained machinery like it was sacred, watched him with suspicious fascination. He ignored their rituals and superstitions, focusing on results.
Generators ran smoother. Water filtration systems stopped failing.
Defensive turrets calibrated properly for the first time in years. The soldiers began to relax around him.
Not trust, but acknowledgement. And that's when chaos made its move.
The first attack came at night. Isaac was alone in the machine shop, fabricating replacement parts from scavenged materials. The plasma cutter he'd built not as refined as his old tool, but functional, hummed as it carved through metal. The temperature dropped, not gradually, instantly. His breath became visible fog. Frost formed on metal surfaces with unnatural speed. Isaac's hand moved to the plasma cutter before his conscious mind registered the threat. The shadows peeled away from the walls.
3 figures emerged.
They wore the tattered remains of Imperial Guard uniforms, but their bodies were wrong. Limbs bent at angles that violated anatomy. Flesh rippled with mouths that whispered obscenities. Dozens of eyes wept luminescent tears.
Chaos cultists.
Or what remained of them after prolonged exposure to warp corruption.
They didn't speak.
They shrieked sounds that bypassed ears and stabbed directly into the brain, carrying promises of pain and pleasure and enlightenment through suffering. Isaac had heard it all before. He triggered the plasma cutter and took the first one's head off. The body collapsed, but the head continued screaming even as it bounced across the floor. The other 2 lunged. Isaac moved like he'd been doing this his entire life. Because he had. He didn't fight like a soldier, no formal training, no martial grace. He fought like an engineer.
Efficient. Brutal.
Using tools as weapons and environment as ally. The second cultist ran into a swing arm he'd activated with a kicked lever. Metal and corrupted flesh met with a wet crunch. The third tried to flank him, but Isaac had already mapped the room's exits. He rolled under a workbench, grabbed a canister of pressurized coolant, and threw it into the cultist's face. The plasma cutter's beam punctured the canister mid-flight. The explosion wasn't large, but it didn't need to be. Superheated gas met sub-zero coolant in a violent reaction that flash froze the cultist's head before shattering it like dropped glass.
Silence returned,
Except for the alarms now blaring throughout the base. Soldiers poured into the machine shop, weapons raised. They found Isaac standing among 3 corpses, breathing hard, bleeding from a gash across his forearm where one cultist had gotten too close. The base commander, a grizzled veteran named Sergeant Kayla, stared at the bodies, then at Isaac. "Emperor's mercy," Kale breathed. "You killed them, alone." Isaac wiped blood from the plasma cutter's nozzle. "They were trying to kill me. Self-defense seemed appropriate." Chaos touched. "Don't die easy. They're pumped full of warp corruption. Takes a full squad to bring down even one."
Isaac shrugged.
"I've dealt with worse."
It was the truth.
Necromorphs had been faster, more numerous, and just as relentless. These cultists were horrifying, certainly. But horror became routine when it was the only constant in your life. Kale studied him with new eyes. "The Inquisitor will want to know about this. I'm sure he will."
The attacks escalated.
The next night, 5 cultists infiltrated through collapsed sewers. Isaac killed them with improvised explosives made from mining charges and fuel cells. The night after, a demon thing, a creature made of liquid hate and physical impossibility, manifested in the barracks. Isaac lured it into the firing range and let the automated defense turrets shred it while he sealed the chamber and vented it into space. Each attack was supposed to break him, to corrupt him, to drag him screaming into chaos. Each attack failed. The chaos entities began to learn something terrifying. Isaac Clarke didn't break because he was already broken. His mind was a landscape of trauma so thoroughly excavated that there was no fertile ground left for corruption to take root. The markers had done chaos's work years ago and inadvertently created the perfect defense. You couldn't promise salvation to a man who'd stopped believing in it. You couldn't offer power to someone who only wanted to be left alone. You couldn't threaten eternal torment on someone already living in it. By the end of the second week, the attacks stopped being about corruption. They became about *elimination*. Chaos wanted him dead, not because he was dangerous, but because he was *resistant*. And resistance, if left unchecked, could become contagious. The largest assault came at dawn. A full warband of cultists, backed by mutant abominations and 2 lesser demons, attacked the forward base. They came for Isaac specifically, chanting his name like a curse.
The Imperial defenders fought desperately. Sergeant Kale organized the defense with veteran skill. But they were outnumbered.
Outmatched. Isaac didn't wait for orders. He transformed the base into a killing field.
Fuel lines became flamethrowers.
Power conduits became electrified traps. Mining equipment became siege weapons. Every system, every machine, every piece of infrastructure, he repurposed it all with ruthless efficiency. The cultists walked into a meat grinder of their own making, guided by their obsession with claiming the one man who'd rejected them. When the Space Marines arrived, summoned by the Inquisition, when reports reached them, they found the base intact. The Chaos forces were annihilated. Bodies littered the approaches, killed by traps, explosives, and improvised weapons. And in the center of it all stood Isaac Clarke, covered in blood and ash, plasma cutter still humming in his hand. The lead Space Marine, a Stern Guard veteran in dark blue armor, approached slowly. His enhanced eyes studied Isaac with clinical precision. "You are the anomaly," the Space Marine said. "It wasn't a question." Isaac nodded, too exhausted to speak. "Chaos threw considerable resources at eliminating you. They failed. That failure will be noted." The Space Marine turned to his squad. "The Inquisitor was correct. This one bears watching." Isaac didn't care about being watched. He cared about the soldiers behind him, wounded but alive. The civilians in the shelters, terrified but safe. He'd bought them time.
Maybe days.
Maybe hours. In the Imperium, he would learn. That was the closest thing to victory anyone ever achieved. The Space Marines requisitioned Isaac for the Carval reclamation campaign.
It wasn't a request.
The Inquisition had deemed him too valuable or too dangerous to leave unsupervised. And the Astartes, genetically engineered super soldiers who knew no fear, wanted to understand what made a baseline human survive what should have killed him. Isaac found himself embedded with the 3rd Company of the Ultramarines, supporting their operations alongside Imperial Guard regiments. The contrast was immediate and jarring. The guardsmen were human, terrified, exhausted, desperately clinging to faith and duty because nothing else kept them standing. They fought with lasguns, laser rifles that fired with reliable mediocrity and died in numbers that made Isaac's stomach turn. But they kept fighting. The Space Marines were something else entirely. They stood nearly 8 feet tall in their powered armor, moved with superhuman speed, and killed with casual efficiency. They were humanity's answer to a galaxy that wanted it extinct. They were not, Isaac noted, engineers. The campaign pushed deep into chaos-held territory, reclaiming industrial sectors one bloody block at a time. Isaac moved with the guardsmen, not the Astartes. The soldiers accepted him warily at first, then with growing respect, when they realized he could fix their equipment mid-battle. Sergeant Kale, promoted and assigned as Isaac's liaison, fought beside him. "You're not like us," Kale said during a lull in combat. They were sheltering in a collapsed hub unit while artillery pounded chaos positions. "You don't pray, don't curse the enemy, don't seem to hate them." Isaac checked the power cell on his plasma cut. "Hating them won't make them less dangerous. Then why fight? Because not fighting means dying, and dying means they win." Kale absorbed this. "The chaplains say we fight for the Emperor, for Holy Terra, for humanity's future. And you believe that?" Kale was quiet for a moment. "I believe someone has to fight. Might as well be me." Isaac almost smiled. "Yeah, that sounds about right." The real test came during the assault on the Chaos Stronghold, a corrupted cathedral where cultists made sacrifices to entities Isaac was learning to hate with professional efficiency. The Space Marines led the charge. The guardsmen supported. Isaac followed because staying behind meant dying alone. The cathedral was a nightmare. Walls made of fused bone. Floors that bled when stepped on. Air thick with the smell of burning souls. The kind of place that broke minds just by existing. Isaac had seen worse on the Ishimura. Barely. The fighting was brutal. Cultists poured from every shadow. Demons manifested in bursts of impossible geometry. The guardsmen died by the dozen, their faith and courage meaning nothing against enemies that shouldn't exist. The Space Marines endured, their transhuman physiology and advanced armor turning aside blows that would have killed lesser beings. And Isaac survived by doing what he always did. He adapted. When a demon manifested and tore through a guard squad, Isaac analyzed its behavior. It was aggressive but stupid, operating on instinct rather than strategy. He lured it into a support column he'd weakened with plasma fire. The column collapsed. The demon shrieked as tons of corrupted stone buried it. When cultists tried to flank the Ultramarines, Isaac spotted the maneuver from his position and triggered a fuel line explosion that cut off their approach. When the Space Marine Tech Marine's armor power supply was damaged by warp lightning, Isaac patched it with improvised components and wire, restoring function in under 3 minutes. The Ultramarines noticed. Brother Sergeant Avitus approached Isaac after the cathedral was purged. The Space Marine removed his helmet, a gesture of respect among the Astartes, revealing a scarred face that had seen centuries of war. "You are not Astartes," Avitus said. "Not even augmented, yet you endure." Isaac shrugged. "I'm good at enduring." "Endurance without purpose is survival. Survival without honor is cowardice, yet I sense neither cowardice nor honor in you. What drives you, Engineer Clarke?" Isaac thought about that. About Nicole. About the Ishimura. About every horror he'd survived, not because he was strong, but because dying felt like giving up. "Spite," Isaac said finally. "Pure, stubborn spite." Avitus stared at him. Then, unexpectedly, the Space Marine laughed, a deep, genuine sound. "Spite, yes, I understand spite." He clasped Isaac's shoulder with a ceramite gauntlet that could have crushed bone. The gesture was surprisingly gentle. You fight like a survivor, not a warrior. But warriors die glorious deaths. Survivors endure. The Imperium needs both. From that moment, the dynamic shifted. The guardsmen stopped seeing Isaac as a strange civilian. They saw him as one of them, someone fighting not because of ideology or enhancement, but because there was no alternative. The Space Marines stopped seeing him as a curiosity. They saw him as proof that baseline humanity still had value. That even without genetic modification or divine blessing, a human could stand against the darkness. Isaac didn't care about symbolism. He cared about keeping people alive. He taught guardsmen how to improvise weapons from scrap, how to set traps using enemy psychology, how to survive when survival seemed impossible. He repaired equipment the Mechanicus had declared irreparable. He improved defenses that hadn't been updated in decades. He solved problems that faith and firepower couldn't touch. And slowly, almost without realizing it, he became something he'd never intended to be. A leader. Not through rank or charisma. Through competence. The soldiers followed him because he kept them alive. The Space Marines respected him because he embodied humanity's core strength, the refusal to quit even when quitting was logical. By the time the Carval campaign concluded, the planet quarantined but no longer actively dying, Isaac had saved more lives than he could count. He'd also earned something rare in the Imperium. Recognition. And in a galaxy where recognition usually meant martyrdom, that was about to become very, very dangerous. The Inquisition arrived in orbit 6 weeks after the cathedral's fall. Not the small delegation that had interrogated Isaac. This was a full inquisitorial fleet, warships bristling with weapons capable of glassing entire continents, accompanied by ecclesiarchal vessels bearing the symbols of the Imperial faith. Isaac stood on the forward base's landing pad, watching dropships descend through the toxic atmosphere. Beside him, Sergeant Cale shifted nervously. "This isn't good," Cale muttered. Isaac had learned enough about the Imperium to agree. When the Inquisition arrived in force, it meant one of two things: salvation or annihilation. Sometimes both. The Inquisitor who stepped from the lead dropship was not the masked figure who'd interrogated Isaac. This one was older, draped in robes of deep black trimmed with gold, his face bearing the scars of a lifetime spent fighting humanity's enemies, both external and internal. Inquisitor Lord Valdis. His reputation had preceded him even to Isaac's ears. A Puritan. A zealot. The kind of man who believed mercy was heresy's accomplice. Valdis surveyed the base with cold eyes, then gestured. Servitors and acolytes poured from the dropships, setting up command infrastructure with mechanical efficiency. Isaac and the base command staff were summoned immediately. The briefing was held in a hastily erected command tent. Valdis stood before a hololithic display showing Carval from orbit, pockets of Imperial control glowing green, vast swaths of chaos corruption pulsing red. "The situation is untenable," Valdis began without preamble. "Carval cannot be reclaimed. Corruption has spread too deeply. Resources required for purification exceed strategic value." Brother Sergeant Avitus, present as the Ultramarines representative, stiffened. "We have secured key industrial zones. Civilian populations remain irrelevant," Valdis interrupted. "The chaos taint persists. Further exposure risks spreading corruption to liberation forces." He turned to face the assembled officers. "I have authorized exterminatus. This world will be purged completely." Silence crashed through the tent. Exterminatus. Planetary annihilation. The Imperium's final solution when a world was deemed beyond saving. Isaac felt something cold settle in his stomach. He'd seen this before. Different context, different authority, same outcome. The people in power deciding that the easiest solution to contamination was to burn everything. "There are 2 million civilians still alive in the secure zones," Isaac said quietly. All eyes turned to him. Valdis's gaze was particularly sharp. "You are the anomaly," Valdis said. "The warp-touched survivor. Your continued existence remains under review." It wasn't a threat. It was a statement of fact. Isaac understood immediately. He was tolerated, not accepted.
and tolerance could be revoked. 2 million people, Isaac repeated. We can evacuate them. Impossible. Fleet transport capacity is insufficient. Evacuation would require 3 weeks minimum. We do not have 3 weeks. Chaos fleets are en route. We must sterilize this world before they can reclaim its resources. Then we make transport capacity sufficient, Isaac insisted, his voice hardening. We repurpose cargo haulers. We overload transports. You will do nothing Valdez snapped. You are a civilian consultant, not command authority. This decision is final. Isaac looked at the others in the tent. Cale's face was ashen. The guard officers looked down, unwilling to meet anyone's eyes. Even Brother Sergeant Avitus seemed troubled, though he said nothing. The Astartes followed the Inquisition's authority in matters of faith and corruption. Isaac had followed authority before, trusted that people in power knew best, that decisions were made rationally. The markers had taught him otherwise. No, Isaac said. Valdez's expression didn't change, but the temperature in the tent seemed to drop. Repeat that. No, Isaac said louder. I'm not going to stand here while you murder 2 million people because it's easier than saving them. Those people are already dead, Valdez said coldly. They have been exposed to chaos corruption. Their bodies may function, but their souls are compromised. We offer them mercy-swift death rather than slow transformation into abominations. That's not mercy. That's convenience. Valdez's hand moved to the bolt pistol at his hip, a casual gesture, but unmistakably threatening. You overstep, Engineer Clarke. Your usefulness does not grant you immunity from consequences. Isaac knew he should back down. Knew that defying an Inquisitor Lord was suicide. But he'd already died a dozen times. What was one more? Then shoot me, Isaac said. But I'm going to save as many people as I can before you pull that trigger. He turned and walked out of the tent. Behind him, chaos erupted, officers shouting, Valdez demanding his arrest. Isaac ignored it all. He had 72 hours before the Exterminatus fleet launched. That meant he had 72 hours to work. He gathered the people who mattered. Sergeant Cale, the base engineers, civilian leaders from the refugee camp, people who understood that hope wasn't about faith and authority, it was about refusing to accept the unacceptable. We have 3 days, Isaac told them. We're going to evacuate everyone we can. The Inquisitor will stop us, one of the engineers protested. Then we don't ask permission. They worked around the clock. Isaac redesigned transport configurations, cramming 3 times the rated capacity into cargo haulers by stripping non-essential systems. He organized evacuation schedules with ruthless efficiency. He bullied, threatened, and bribed shuttle pilots into making runs they weren't authorized for. The Inquisition noticed. Valdez sent enforcers to shut down the unauthorized evacuation. Brother Sergeant Avitus intercepted them. The Space Marine said nothing, but his presence, his transhuman bulk blocking the corridor, was statement enough. The enforcers retreated. Later, Avitus found Isaac in a hangar bay, supervising the boarding of another overloaded transport. You make a mistake, the Space Marine said. Probably. The Inquisitor is correct. Many of these refugees may be tainted. You risk spreading corruption. I risk trying, Isaac countered. There's a difference. Avitus was silent for a moment. The Imperium functions through sacrifice. Individual lives matter less than humanity's survival. I know the logic, Isaac said tiredly. I just don't accept the conclusion. Why not? Because if we only save humanity by killing humans, what's the point? Avitus had no answer for that. In 72 hours, Isaac's unauthorized evacuation saved 843,000 people. Not everyone, not even half, but nearly 1 million souls who would have died if he'd followed orders. When the Exterminatus fleet launched cyclonic torpedoes screaming down through the atmosphere, Isaac watched from the observation deck of a refugee transport. Carval died in fire. The surface burned until the crust cracked. Atmosphere vented into space. An entire world reduced to a lifeless cinder. Isaac turned away before the light faded. He'd saved who he could, lost who he couldn't. He was learning.
the only kind of victory the Imperium allowed. The unauthorized evacuation should have ended with Isaac's execution. Inquisitor Lord Valdis had every legal right to declare him heretic, traitor, or simply inconvenient. One bolt round to the skull would have solved the problem of the engineer who didn't understand his place. But something unexpected happened. The refugees talked. Stories spread through refugee fleets, guard regiments, navy vessels. The tale of a civilian who defied an Inquisitor Lord to save lives. Who improvised evacuations while the Imperium's official apparatus declared the task impossible. More importantly and more dangerously, the story reached chaos. The dark gods noticed the man they couldn't corrupt. The survivor who'd walked through the warp unbroken. The engineer who turned their assaults into failures. And in noticing, they made him a symbol. Isaac became a priority target. Not strategically important. Symbolically crucial asterisk. Chaos thrived on inevitability. On the certainty that all resistance eventually crumbled. That corruption always won. That humanity's hope was a lie waiting to be exposed. Isaac Clarke represented a challenge to that narrative. So chaos hunted him. The first assassination attempt came during transfer to another war zone. Cultists infiltrated the transport ship, attempting to trigger a warp breach directly in Isaac's quarters. They failed. Isaac detected the ritual components being assembled. His engineers, recognizing energy patterns that shouldn't exist, and flooded the section with coolant, disrupting the ceremony before it completed. The second attempt involved a demon assassin, a creature of pure malice bound into quasi-physical form, designed to slip through reality's cracks and murder targets silently. It found Isaac repairing a void shield generator during a battle against orc pirates. The demon materialized behind him, blade limbs extending to pierce his spine. Isaac, without turning around, triggered the void shield at full power. The demon was caught in the energy field, its half-real existence, unable to withstand technology designed to deflect reality warping phenomena. It shrieked once before dissolving. Isaac went back to his repair. The third attempt was more elaborate. An entire chaos warband backed by sorcerers and demon engines attacked a forward base specifically because intelligence indicated Isaac was present. They weren't wrong. He was there. He was also ready. By this point, Isaac had spent months in the Imperium. He'd learned its systems, its weaknesses, its potential. And he'd done what engineers do. He'd improved things. The base defenses he'd upgraded turned the chaos assault into a slaughter. Automated turrets with predictive targeting. Minefields that responded to warp signatures. Kill zones designed around enemy psychology rather than simple firepower. The chaos forces were annihilated. Not through superior numbers or faith. Through superior preparation. The sorcerer leading the assault, a former Astartes who'd turned to the dark gods centuries ago, survived long enough to confront Isaac directly. "You cannot win," the sorcerer hissed, his voice distorted by warp corruption. "You are one man. We are eternal. We are inevitable." Isaac, standing amid the burning ruins of the sorcerer's warband, looked exhausted. Haunted, but not beaten. "You know what I've learned?" Isaac said quietly. "Inevitability is just another word for hasn't failed yet." He triggered the plasma cutter. The sorcerer died surprised. News of these failures spread. Not through official Imperial channels, the Inquisition controlled those tightly, but through whispers, rumors, the dark mirrors of communication that existed in the warp and its reflection in real space. Chaos entities began to recognize Isaac's presence on battlefields. And increasingly, they avoided him. It wasn't fear. Not exactly. The Chaos gods knew no fear. But they understood failure. And Isaac Clarke had become synonymous with it. Tactical reports from Chaos-aligned forces began to include strange notations. Warnings to commanders that certain battlefields should be abandoned if the unbreakable one was present. That corruption attempts near him were statistically unlikely to succeed. The Imperium noticed. Reports reached the High Lords of Terra. The bureaucratic machinery that governed humanity's billion worlds became aware of an anomaly. a baseline human who functioned as anti-chaos weaponry simply by existing.
Some wanted him studied, replicated,
Turned into a template for anti-warp resistance.
some wanted him destroyed,
He was too unpredictable, too willing to defy authority.
some wanted him weaponized,
Deployed to critical battlefields as a psychological warfare asset. Isaac wanted none of it. He'd learned the hard way that attention from powerful entities, weather markers, or chaos gods, or institutional authorities only brought suffering. So he did what he'd always done.
he disappeared. Not physically.
He couldn't exactly hide in an empire of 1,000,000 worlds where every citizen's existence was documented, catalogued, and monitored. But he became functionally invisible by being exactly where he was needed, but not obviously important. He attached himself to guard regiments deploying to contested war zones. He worked as a civilian contractor on Navy vessels. He showed up at battlefields where chaos incursions were occurring, and quietly made himself indispensable. He saved lives,
Fix things.
solved problems that faith and firepower couldn't touch. And when authorities arrived to debrief, to study, to control, he was already gone, transferred to the next crisis. Brother Sergeant Avitus found him months after Carval. The Space Marine had tracked him to a refugee processing station on the edge of the Imperium.
You run, Avitus observed.
I keep moving, Isaac corrected. There's a difference. The Inquisition seeks you, not for punishment, for deployment. You have become a strategic asset. I'm not a weapon. All humans are weapons in this war. You simply refuse to be aimed. Isaac looked at the refugees streaming past, families fleeing from some horror he'd probably face next week. Children who'd never known peace. Elderly who'd survived too much and expected to survive nothing. I spent years as a tool, Isaac said quietly. Used by corporations, governments, the markers themselves. Everyone wanted to aim me at their problems. I'm done with that. Then what do you fight for? Isaac watched a child, maybe 8 years old, clutching a stuffed animal that had seen better decades, smile at something her mother said.
Moments, Isaac said.
Just moments where things are less terrible than they could be. Avitus studied him for a long moment. Then the Space Marine did something unexpected. He knelt, bringing his transhuman bulk down to Isaac's eye level. That, Avitus said, is the most human thing I have heard in 2 centuries. He stood, turned, and walked away.
Isaac never saw him again.
But the story persisted. Across battlefields and refugee camps and military installations, the legend grew. The man chaos couldn't break. The engineer who survived hell by refusing to accept its authority. The symbol of humanity's stubborn, irrational, magnificent refusal to quit. Isaac Clarke didn't want to be a symbol. But in a galaxy that devoured hope, sometimes symbols were all that kept the darkness at bay.
Years passed, or maybe decades.
Time moved strangely when you spent it running from one crisis to the next.
Isaac Clarke aged.
The trauma that had carved lines into his face deepened. His hands, scarred from countless repairs and battles, moved with the precision of long practice. His eyes, always haunted, settled into a permanent exhaustion that no amount of sleep could cure. He never stopped moving.
War zones, refugee camps, industrial disasters,
Warp incursions. Wherever humans suffered and systems failed, Isaac appeared. Not through official deployment, not through authorities' command. He just showed up. Fixed what was broken. Saved who could be saved. Left before anyone could properly thank or detain him. The Imperium's bureaucracy lost track of him. Too many wars.
too many casualties.
One civilian engineer, no matter how unusual, became statistical noise in a galaxy of constant crisis. But the people remembered.
Guardsmen told stories around campfires.
About the strange man who'd turned impossible battlefields into survivable ones. Who fought with improvised weapons and engineers' cunning. Who'd looked at chaos and simply refused to break. Refugees whispered his name in camps and shelters. The engineer who defied an inquisitor to save lives. Who treated survival as a technical problem rather than a miracle. Navy crews shared rumors that certain ships were blessed not by the Emperor, but by a man who understood machines better than prayers. The ecclesiarchy tried to canonize him, to turn him into Saint Isaac, the unbreakable, the martyr who would not fall. Isaac learned about the effort third hand and laughed until he cried. Then he disappeared for 6 months, emerging on the opposite side of the galaxy. The Inquisition eventually stopped hunting him. Not from mercy, from pragmatism. Every attempt to contain or control him failed. Every time they located him, he was in the middle of saving lives they'd have written off as acceptable losses. And the reports compiled across decades showed an undeniable pattern. Wherever Isaac Clarke operated, chaos corruption rates dropped. Not dramatically, not miraculously, but measurably. His presence didn't inspire faith. It inspired something more dangerous to chaos, practical hope. The kind that came from watching a baseline human survive what should kill him, and thinking maybe I can survive too. The dark gods hated him for it. But hatred without the ability to act was just impotent rage. Isaac Clarke had become, inadvertently, a form of psychological warfare. Living proof that chaos was not inevitable. That madness could be resisted not through faith or superhuman enhancement, but through sheer, stubborn human persistence. He never learned about the strategic assessments, the theological debate, the legends growing around his name. He was too busy working. On a mining colony where a warp breach had killed half the population, Isaac spent 3 weeks repairing life support and evacuating survivors. On a hive world besieged by cultists, he taught local militia how to build improvised explosives from industrial materials. On a Navy vessel crippled by demon-possessed machinery, he exorcised the corruption not with prayers but by systematically rebuilding every contaminated system from scratch. He saved thousands, tens of thousands, perhaps millions, if you counted the cascade effects of systems restored and disasters prevented. He also failed constantly. Arrived too late. Watched people die despite his best efforts. Faced problems even he couldn't engineer solutions for. But he kept trying. That was the thing about Isaac Clarke. He'd never been the strongest, fastest, or smartest. He'd never been blessed by gods or enhanced by science. He'd just been too stubborn to quit when quitting was logical. And in a galaxy where logic suggested humanity had already lost that, the Imperium was a rotting corpse shambling toward inevitable extinction. That chaos would eventually consume everything. That hope was a lie and faith a delusion. Stubborn illogic was revolutionary. The Imperium would forget him eventually. Empires had short memories, especially when those memories were inconvenient. But in refugee camps and forward bases, in guard regiments and mining colonies, the stories persisted. About the man who'd survived cosmic horror. Who'd walked through the warp unbroken. Who'd saved lives when authorities declared them unsavable. About the engineer who fought chaos not with faith or fury, but with improvised weapons and stubborn refusal to accept inevitability. Chaos would remember too. In the eternal warp, where time was meaningless and grudges lasted forever, Isaac Clarke remained a scar. A reminder that even the dark gods could fail. That mortal will, properly applied, could resist immortal malice. And somewhere, on some forgotten battlefield in humanity's endless war for survival, an exhausted engineer with haunted eyes worked through the night, repairing a generator, saving lives, refusing to quit. Not because he believed he could win, but because quitting meant they'd already won. And Isaac Clarke, the man who'd survived hell twice, had decided long ago that spite was reason enough to keep breathing. In the grim darkness of the far future, where there is only war, one light still flickered. Quiet, unassuming, easily overlooked, but persistent. And sometimes, persistence is its own kind of victory.